Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening. Thank you very much for coming to AMMTE's first ever webinar. My name is Barbara Swartz, and I'm from McDaniel College and the president of AMMTE. We are so grateful for Dr. Amanda Jansen from the University of Delaware and are very excited to continue our series focusing on equity in the mathematics classroom this evening. We would also like to thank AMTE for letting us use their webinar program and inviting everyone from across the entire nation and not just limiting this wonderful opportunity to us in Maryland. I'd also like to thank the AMMTE board. A couple of our board members are here with us tonight. And as you see, my attendee, my name comes up as Tim Hendricks. He is the executive director of AMTE because we are using their accounts. Our next webinar, real quick announcement, will be Thursday, April 11th with Dr. Krista Jackson from the University of Iowa, and she will be discussing pre-service teachers' conceptions of equity. And our next member meeting, for those in Maryland, is Friday, June 12th. Please visit ammte.org for more information and to register for those events. As with all technology-rich experiences, we may experience some technical difficulties, so please bear with us if that happens. If we need to restart, we can do just that. I'd also like to orient you to the menu on most likely your right-hand side. You can post questions in the little questions tab or questions, comments in the chat tab. That will just go to me, and then anything that's worthy of the group, Mandy is going to have you introduce yourselves, and so I will just copy and paste your responses so that way they send out to the whole group. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Amanda Jansen. She lives in Newark, Delaware, where she teaches prospective elementary mathematics teachers at the University of Delaware as a professor in the School of Education. She has also regularly provided professional development to in-service secondary mathematics teachers in collaboration with the Delaware Mathematics Coalition. Mandy conducts research in mathematics classrooms to understand what motivates students to engage deeply with mathematics and what teachers can do to create classrooms that motivate and engage students. Her book, Motivation Matters and Interest Counts, co-written with Jim Middleton at Arizona State University, was published by the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. She's currently in the midst of working on her next book, Rough Draft Math, which will be published by Stenhouse. Prior to earning her PhD in educational psychology from Michigan State, she was a junior high school mathematics teacher in Arizona. Mandy's current National Science Foundation grant, also with Middleton, is called SMILES, Secondary Mathematics in the Moment Longitudinal Engagement Study. Here is Dr. Amanda Jansen.
Thanks so much, Barb. I'm really delighted that people could come to this webinar tonight. I know that everyone is very busy, so I really appreciate people's time. When the Maryland group of the Association of Mathematics Teacher Educators invited me to do this, they helpfully challenged me to think about rough draft thinking, which is a concept I've been working on for a while, but in the context of equity in mathematics education. And so that's why this word humanize is going to be a part of this session tonight. So one thing that is difficult about doing a session like this is that we can't really see each other. So I wanted to let you know a little bit about who I am, and if your little right-hand screen is in the way, my picture is in the bottom right-hand side. And my name is Mandy, and like Barb said, I work at the University of Delaware, and I'm a math educator, and I used to teach junior high. But other things about me besides being a researcher, a teacher, educator, is that I like to play pinball. I own a pinball machine. I like to kayak and paddleboard, so I love that it's turning into spring. I like to engage with yoga, and I'm currently a Delawarean, but I used to be a Wildcat and a Michigan State Spartan. And if you can see the map of Delaware that's in the upper right-hand side, you'll notice that the state top is shaped like an arc, and when the border of the state was drawn, compass was used. And so that's why Newark, Delaware is called New Arc, Delaware, because the top of Delaware is like an arc. So I'm curious who's here. So in the chat window where it says question, you can type a question, but instead of a question, you can introduce yourself. So I'm curious about your name, where you are tonight, what's your professional role, and then I was trying to model this, something you enjoy in your life outside of work, so we can humanize ourselves to each other. So please share, and I will continue after that. Hi, Matt. Hi, Trisha. Hi, Norma. Yes, +1. Hi, Stephanie. Ooh, planner babe. Oh, hi, Courtney. Yay. Ah, Eris is here. Hi, Susan. Hi, Rob. Hi, Eve. Hello, Erin. So yes, thank you. Please keep introducing yourselves, and I'm going to continue a bit and say, so this session is about rough draft thinking. And so the first thing I like to do when I talk with people about rough drafts is that the term rough draft thinking carries some meaning in itself just by the phrase rough draft thinking. And that's why it's useful to use with kids or learners of any ages. Ask people to share their drafts in math. So I have a link here that I'd like you to go to on whatever device you have. You can use an alternative device besides your laptop. You can click on the link in the chat. And this is a Padlet. And so if you click on the screen, there's for my iPad, there's a little plus sign. And you click on the screen. And I'm curious about what you initially think coming into this seminar. Why might math teachers incorporate the use of rough drafts or rough draft thinking into math classrooms? And why this is important is that you already have insights about this, and I'm wondering about eliciting your initial thinking about rough draft thinking, and then during the seminar tonight, you can think about how your ideas can be revised based on these perspectives that I'll be sharing tonight about revision and humanizing the math classroom. And even if rough draft thinking is something you've thought about before, every time I think about rough draft thinking with other people, my thinking evolves and changes. That's the beauty of learning with other people in collaboration. This is so great as I have my iPad open and I'm seeing ideas just appear. And this is making me not feel like I'm like a tree falling in the forest. There's actually people here with me. This is delightful. Almost all thinking is rough draft thinking. Obviously, I'm biased in that direction because our thinking is constantly evolving and changing and growing all the time. Oh, I really appreciate the engagement. So if you're joining us, I have a link that is here on the slide, and you can go to this website and you can share some of your initial ideas of why rough drafts might be a useful process to incorporate in math classrooms. All right. Okay, feel free to keep writing here if you would like, and I'm going to move on to the next piece. So I find it really useful when I work with folks around rough draft thinking to do a small bit of rough draft engagement around mathematics together. So which one doesn't belong is a math routine that my former grad student colleague, Christopher Danielson, has a book about. Christopher Danielson works for Desmos right now. We went to grad school together at Michigan State University, but this image didn't come from Christopher's book. This image came from D. Eric Lee on Twitter. So I'd like you to put in chat, for any reason, why might one of these images not belong? There's all kinds of reasons. And one of the beauties of the which one doesn't belong routine is that each image might not belong for a different reason. So there's all kinds of things to notice about which image doesn't belong. So in the window where there's questions, you could put your questions that would get reposted in chat. So please share which one doesn't belong from your perspective. I love the different perspectives, which one doesn't belong. Aha, somebody's noticing these are naval flags. One of the reasons why I thought this image was so cool is that these are nautical signal flags. I'm always trying to find math contexts that are maybe not the typical things, like not about shopping or baking or something. So I'm noticing things with colors, with shapes. Now I'd like to nudge you to think about something with fractions and area in addition to your engagement in the which one doesn't belong. Are you noticing anything with fractions related to area and the spaces there? Because there's beautiful noticings with the colors, there's beautiful noticings with horizontal, vertical, diagonal, this sort of thing. And I had to think about how to think about the area in the bottom left. How would I think about that area? It was a fun puzzle to think about these different areas. And if I think about the area of one color versus the area of the another color, it's pretty great. All right. So after we engage students in a which one doesn't belong, it's a free space where people are sharing all their noticings and they can then take a step back and think individually. And I'd have them write on a note card, one reason one of these nautical flags didn't belong was because, and then we could go on a journey and look up what these different nautical flags represent, something like that. And then we could engage in a tiny bit of revising. A surprising reason why a flag did not belong was, and then they would think about their surprise would be a way that they're thinking revised about which flag didn't belong. And so a big part of rough draft thinking is you want to initially check out how you're noticing something and how you're thinking about something, but then revisit and revise your thinking. So how is which one doesn't belong a rough draft experience? If you have insights about that, that's something you're welcome to put in the chat. You're welcome to put anything in the chat anytime, by the way, anything you're noticing. But I think there's lots of reasons why which one doesn't belong could be a rough draft experience. All ideas are welcome in a which one doesn't belong. There's no way to be wrong. There's a reason why each one of the flags doesn't belong. And it's a powerful experience because you're identifying attributes and you're noticing different attributes. And then you can guide and nudge people to your mathematical goal if you want. But the other noticings that people have, they're not incorrect either. They're all valid ways of thinking. All drafts that people have are worth considering. And then we're revising our thinking all of the time. Our first impressions about which one doesn't belong do not end up being our last impressions. Because when we hear another idea or another draft from someone else, it can inspire us to revise our ideas. However, I want to be clear. Rough draft thinking isn't just doing which one doesn't belong all the time. Which one doesn't belong is just a quick way to do some rough drafting and revising with a group in a short period of time. You can do rough draft thinking with a lot of problems. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit, or at least I'll share a little bit more about that in a bit. And I was challenged to think about equity in contrast to as a part of rough draft thinking. And so in a humanized math classroom, I've been reading a lot lately about humanizing the math classroom, and I'm noticing that not everyone defines what this means, and people are using the word in different ways to mean different things. So if I was to say rough draft thinking and humanize math classroom, what it means to me, I would say in a humanized math classroom, students' mathematical thinking is appreciated. It's appreciated at every stage in any form. Whatever initial ideas you have, whatever revised ideas you have, whatever insights you notice, they're valuable. They help you keep learning and they help everyone else in the room keep learning. So students' mathematical thinking is appreciated at every stage in every form. And students are appreciated for who they are, however they are, each day. However you show up, however you're thinking now, it's embraced because it's a draft, and we know that we'll keep evolving our thinking together. Because when mathematical learning experiences are humanized, more students' ideas are then shared and welcomed. So then more powerful mathematical knowledge is developed among the classroom community because we get to hear from more people. So how can which one doesn't belong be a humanizing experience? Well, I would say it's humanizing because there's so many different ways to notice why something doesn't belong. So many insights are welcome. And during a which one doesn't belong experience, we don't freeze each other in time. We don't define each other by what one individual says in any particular moment. You can shout out one reason why something doesn't belong, then you can notice another thing. And we embrace ourselves and one another as works in progress. We're constantly noticing. Notice something else. Notice what someone else said. See what they see. And so that's just very welcoming. We're constantly growing and learning. So what do I mean by rough draft thinking? I haven't defined that yet on purpose because it can mean a lot of different things and it's useful in a lot of different ways in a math classroom. So I would say rough draft thinking is when we're communicating to learn. Whether we're talking, whether we're writing, whether we're gesturing to communicate, whether we're drawing a representation, just the act of trying to put something into words, into a representation, that process helps us crystallize our ideas and refine our thinking. So we're communicating, but we're continuing to learn through that process. We're sharing our thinking, whether or not we feel like it's finished, whether or not we feel like we're done. And we're constantly revising. Our ideas are emerging, and then by making them public, by making them an object, we can notice things about them and then revise our thinking again. We're willing to revise. We're willing to keep revising our ideas. And this doesn't mean fixing something that's wrong. It means taking our ideas and refining them, extending them, making new connections. Even when you have something very correct, you can make a new connection. You can represent it in a different way. So as we learn, we're constantly evolving. So this slide, it says using communication to learn rather than perform smartness. I have two stories about this. Story one, in the first part of my research career about 15 years ago, I spent a lot of time interviewing kids about what it feels like to share your thinking in math classrooms, particularly when you're not sure that you're right. And a lot of kids said that they felt like it was scary to be wrong in front of other people. And that's not surprising. We probably could have predicted that before I talked with them. But it really told me that if they felt that way, then the culture of the discussion was, we're talking to perform. We're talking to perform how smart we are. But as a teacher, I want us to talk with each other so we can all keep learning together. I want to learn from what someone has to share. So in contrast, rough draft talk, that's talking to learn, communicating to learn. It's more exploratory. So that's story one, is that not all kids see that talking in class is an exploratory space where we'll keep learning together. Story two is I have a reference at the bottom of this screen. It's for a book, Exploratory Talk for Learning. And I worked with teachers in Delaware, and we had a study group where we read chapters from this book. And we thought, how can we create these exploratory spaces in our classroom? And through that process of thinking about creating exploratory spaces in our classroom in the study group, the teachers said, I don't want to call it exploratory talk. I want to call this rough draft talk because rough drafts make more sense to kids. Rough drafts relate to their experiences in language arts. So instead of saying exploratory talk, I'm using the phrase rough draft talk because that's what the teachers taught me that I worked with in Delaware that was useful for working with their kids.
And Mandy, I don't want to interrupt or I don't mean to interrupt, I
Yeah.
apologize, but a great question just came through the question box about any resources to set the stage for this and build the culture from the beginning of the year. So that's a great resource. Do you have any others that might be worth sharing, or maybe a place we could put them at the end or something?
I do. So I shared about that book, and I will be addressing some of those points as I go through. So that will come up later. So thank you for
Awesome.
asking. I'm glad. And so people should keep putting in questions, and I am seeing them. So what rough draft talk looks like and sounds like and feels like when we're engaging in it, it's when we're using this abrupt, bumpy start and stops and expressions of uncertainty when you're talking and you're not really sure. I've had students say things like, oh, I don't know how to say this. My brain hurts because I'm trying to get it out. And that's really how it feels when you're using talk to work on your understanding. And rough draft talk is important because anytime you're trying to understand something, talking it through can help. We talk to ourselves all the time when we're trying to work our way through something. So letting students know that this is a very normal part of learning something new. So I would say, I'm saying all the time lately about using a rough draft spirit. And so embracing a rough draft spirit, it's a humanizing practice because Magdalene Lampert writes about sharing our thinking in math class together involves both intellectual courage and intellectual humility. So you have the courage to put out your drafts when you're not sure, and the humility to be willing to take in what other people notice about what you have to say and to keep revising it, and to the humility to listen to other people's points of view and use that to revise your own thinking. Also, the rough draft spirit requires empathy, really believing that other people around you have something to offer. Whatever someone else says makes sense to them. And so if you don't understand it at first, it doesn't mean that they're wrong or their ideas aren't valuable. It means taking the time to realize this makes sense to them right now. And so I want to sit with it and try to make sense of it. And so that's intellectually humble, and we're listening with our minds. And it's also very loving. We're listening with our hearts, and we're believing that people who are with us have something to say that we can learn from. And so the rough draft spirit really requires this humanizing orientation. So here's another resource. And Barb, if you could put this link in the chat. This link takes you to an article that I wrote with 3 teachers in Delaware, Brandy, Steph, and Phil, and they were in the study group when we read the exploratory talk book. And one of the questions might be somewhat addressed in this article, but this link will take you to the PDF of this piece, and it's an 1,800-word article, and so you can read it in a relatively short period of time. And then the book version that I'm working on right now is 6 chapters. So you can I view this article as the trailer, or maybe this webinar as the trailer, and the book is like the longer movie. So I'm going to summarize a little bit about this article next. So what did we talk about in this article? We talked about setting up rough draft talk in math classrooms. And the first principle of rough draft talk in math class, these principles and practices were all generated by teachers in a study group in Delaware, secondary math teachers. They came up with ways of engaging students in rough draft talk. And they said the first thing that you need to do is building this culture supportive of intellectual risk-taking that you have to keep rebuilding and keep supporting, and letting students know that they can tag their talk as rough draft. Students will immediately start saying things like, I don't know, this is just my draft, but, and they will start sharing. And teaching students to engage in non-evaluative dialogue and discussion with each other, where they're seeking to understand one another rather than critique. And I'll give examples of that later in the talk. I'll talk more about norm setting in a little bit. Promoting the belief that learning math involves revising our understanding over time. And that's true for everyone all the time. So we're always revising our thinking. Even when we think that we know something well, we can always learn more about it and make new connections. So providing students with explicit opportunities to keep revising their thinking is a very helpful part of promoting a culture of rough draft talk. And revising can happen in a bunch of ways. And if other people have ideas of how they incorporate revision into their classroom, they can share that. And I'll share a little bit about revision in a bit. Another important principle about rough draft talk is it allows you to raise students' statuses by expanding on what counts as a valuable solution in math class. So if we value in-progress ideas as something that the entire class can learn from, then it's talking in math class is way more than sharing a correct answer quickly. Sharing an insight at any stage can inspire anyone at any time. Whatever idea you currently have could be inspiring, and so then more students get to be inspiring for each other. More students have things to offer if we value more types of contributions. And you can strategically call on someone, even if their idea is in progress, and highlight what's beautiful, insightful, useful about that idea, even if it's not formed yet. And then more students can be positioned as competent and helpful and valuable thinkers in the classroom. So if you're going to foster rough draft thinking in math classrooms, I think there's 4 important practices to think about. And the first one is related to this question. It's related to norm setting, and I'll talk about that. I'll talk about how task selection and implementation can affect rough drafts. I'll talk about creating explicit opportunities to revise our thinking, and then humanizing the classroom. And it's important to talk with students and say things when we're setting norms, and just letting them know that sharing thinking at any stage helps everyone keep learning. And it's important to share our thinking at any stage because we talk to learn. The process of talking helps us keep learning, and we're revising our thinking to continue to learn. And our thinking is always evolving, so talking about this all the time to normalize that practice is really important. And letting students reflect on how their experience of communicating helped their thinking evolve is important too. So, norm setting to foster rough draft thinking. This is that space where you're tagging the talk as rough drafts. Okay, everyone, drafts are welcome here. Drafts are an important part about learning. You can share your drafts at any point, but norm setting is more than that. So here's one strategy. Shout out to Crystal Craig in San Antonio. She has a beautiful article, so here's another reference, called The Rights of the Learner, that's in Democracy and Education. And then there's a few response pieces to this piece that are also wonderful. So you can work with your class to brainstorm what they want their rights as learners to be. So here's 5 examples. The right to be confused, the right to make a mistake, the right to say what makes sense to you, the right to share unfinished thinking and not be judged, the right to revise your thinking. So at the beginning of the year, you could introduce these rights to your students, and then you can also have them brainstorm other rights that you would like them to have. And they could come up with all kinds of things like, I want the right to not be randomly called on. I want the right to wait to share my thinking. And then you have to decide, all right, I have to take that right seriously. So to let them know that they really have these rights, you have to agree to abide by them. And you have to help students see that you really mean it. You mean to give them these rights. And so not just a slogan system, but something you interact with them about on a daily basis. So be brave, be kind. Shout out to Andrew Bush, who is a secondary teacher in Boulder, Colorado. These 2 phrases are so powerful because it gets at the intellectual courage and the intellectual humility involved with rough draft thinking. And so these two ideas as norms have been so powerful with teachers in Delaware. And so then how do we go beyond these phrases as a slogan system to make them really feel real in the classroom? And one space to do that is to ask students to reflect. Think about moments when you were enacting your rights and what that felt like, and have them write reflections. Think about a time when your rights were being violated, your rights as learners, and point that out to help us understand how to move beyond that. What new rights does the community need to have to make sure we all have rights? Recognize when someone was being brave or being kind in class, and you can have a reflection on that. And when were you being brave or being kind? And how does that help you learn and feel valued as a person? And so moving towards being explicit with students that you want your classroom community to be like this, but then really making it be alive. Andrew Bush, who told me about the be brave, be kind norms, he said it takes him at least a month to fully establish this in the classroom, so students are brave and kind with each other, and they really believe that they are welcome to be brave and kind with each other. You have to constantly revisit it. And so it's not something that happens overnight. We rebuild this all the time. Task selection and implementation for fostering rough draft thinking. So the tasks that we work on together, they can invite drafts in different ways, both in the tasks that we select and then how we implement them with the class. So we did a which one doesn't belong. We're going to do another math problem, and I love this one. So please get ready to type in your thinking so then we can think together about a task. And I'm going to launch the task with a would you rather perspective. So I'm going to give you two options, and you're going to think about which one you would rather have and why. And this is a way to elicit initial thinking. So part of rough drafts are initialing initial thinking, eliciting initial thinking, and then having experiences where you can then revise. So would you rather, of course, these are glasses you're going to have lemonade in. Would you rather have one large ice cube in the shape of a cube? And if you assume these other ice cubes on the right are made up of the same amount of water or ice, but they're also in cubes, would you rather have one big ice cube with the same amount of water, ice making it up, or would you rather have a bunch of these smaller cubes with the same amount of water or ice? And why? Which one would you rather have and why? Please put your thoughts. What I love about these responses is that they include like your personal preferences, things that you like and not like, in addition to some other reasons. So it looks like there's a conjecture coming up that the ones on the right are going to have more surface area, and that's going to make a difference by how quickly things cool, as well as the experience, and then also the chewing of the ice, that's fun. Conjecture about surface area making a difference. The larger ice cube, concentrated coldness. Everybody wants a choice. So one thing then I would do is I would put up a bunch of different reasons of why people would want the larger one or the smaller one, and then keep those as conjectures. So the larger one might last longer, the other one might melt more quickly, the surface area might make a difference. And I like to think about this, do you want to sip your drink or do you want to slam your drink? And so that might make a difference of which ice you would like. So then I would, after we did the class brainstorm of which one you would rather have, I would then have individual students write down your first draft. If you want to cool your drink, which ice cubes would you use? And then explain and justify their thinking. So they would record their first draft and write out their reasons now after they heard a bunch of different brainstorms about why. And if you would like to look at the math lesson that goes along with this, this is a task from Mathalicious. Mathalicious is a website that has a lot of problem-based activities. And it's a modeling experience, and it makes certain assumptions. It starts out by saying the larger cube would be a 6 centimeter by 6 centimeter by 6 centimeter cube. And then it compares with a 3 by 3 by 3 of the same size amount of water, and then down to 1 by 1 by 1, and then how many ice cubes, and you're comparing surface area. And then it makes some assumptions about how quickly ice melts, and the students get more mathematical data about the differences between the experiences of these different ice cubes melting. So if you want to check this out, you can go to that website. And so when I implement this task, it has a rough draft thinking revision experience to it. After the would you rather and after the individual think time of your first draft, then I have students work in groups through that ideas on the task of comparing the cubes from different perspectives. I've paused group work intermittently and have students strategically share early drafts to share and discuss. So I'm having groups share their rough drafts. And one of the ways I try to promote non-evaluative sharing is I ask these questions a lot. What do you notice in your colleagues' work? Imagine I'm having students go up to the document camera and share their thinking. And after they share, how do you get people to engage with each other's thinking? The groups, what do you notice? What do you appreciate? And what do you wonder? I've recently added this question, what do you appreciate? Because it really helps both sense making and humanizing. So you have to notice something in someone's work to appreciate it. And then by noticing, you're making sense out of their work. And by appreciating it, you're elevating and you're amplifying something that you found useful to you. And that feels really good when someone says that they appreciated something about your work. So we're sharing an early draft and then going back and groups revised your work, because I'm having people share their work before they're done. And so after some rough drafts have been shared, the groups would revise. And then I had groups make posters, a group draft about which ice cubes they would choose and why. And what's nice about this problem is that you can justify the one big one or a bunch of little ones. Either way, the mathematics can be used to justify one or the other because it's a preference, but you can generate more mathematical data and information to justify which position you want to take. And either position is valid, but you can get more refined with your reason through the mathematics. Then we do a gallery walk and we look at the posters and you get insights about which one might make a difference. Then I have them go back and do an individual reflection now. They take their first draft and they revise it. Which ice cubes would you choose and why? So you take your next draft, you're revising your initial thinking. And so you're not correcting anything. Maybe you change your initial stance, but really what's going to happen is that your justification will become more elaborated. So this is an example of a task that has more than one quote unquote correct answer, depending on how you justify it. So if you want to get students thinking, you can ask them a question that has more than one good answer and give them opportunities to revise their thinking. So engaging students in rough draft thinking involves giving them many explicit opportunities to revise their thinking. So thinking about the which one doesn't belong activity and the ice cube activity. For which one doesn't belong, your initial ideas for which one could change. You could develop new ways of seeing. So initially, if you were just noticing colors, you could then notice the different shapes and ways of talking about the shapes. Then you might notice the area of one color in relationship to the whole, or one color in relationship to the other color, new ways of seeing. The ice cube problem, your initial ideas are elicited. Maybe your initial stance changed, or maybe you still like the same kind of ice, and your justification could become more elaborated and more strongly backed by data. And this is an important thing that I want students or learners to understand about revising. Revising your thinking isn't fixing a mistake. It's taking your ideas and refining them, extending them, connecting them, justifying them in different ways. So, humanizing the classroom. How does rough draft thinking provide opportunities to humanize the math classroom? In a humanized math classroom, actually, Rochelle Gutierrez says rehumanize the math classroom. Mathematics has always been a humanized activity, and unfortunately, sometimes in school we dehumanize mathematics. And so in school we have to work to rehumanize something that's been dehumanized. In a humanized math classroom, students' ideas and ways of thinking are valued. Students have choices and freedom of expression. Their strengths are noticed and appreciated by the teacher and their classmates. And the students have the right to be who they are while learning and doing math. You are noticing all kinds of things today. In addition to aspects of the ice-like surface area, you're able to say what preferences mattered to you and what you liked. So when we humanize the math classroom through rough drafting, students' mathematical thinking, it's appreciated and valued at every stage in any form. We can learn from insights that people have. And students then feel appreciated for who they are, however they are every day. It releases the burden that the only way to have a valuable contribution in math class is to have a correct answer quickly. And more students then come together to participate in the process of developing math knowledge in the classroom. This is very liberating for people when you can share your ideas at any stage. But we don't also allow each other to remain in our drafts. We challenge each other to keep refining and revising our ideas. But when I've worked with teachers on rough draft thinking, some of them have said, maybe there's no such thing as a final draft. And that might be true because we keep revising and improving and evolving our ideas all the time. And so when I'm trying to teach students and myself really to engage in non-evaluative thinking with each other, non-evaluative responding to each other's thinking, when I first was trying to get students to interact with each other, I'd have someone share their work and students wouldn't know what to say about it. They're like, yep, that looks good. So these sentence starters helped me help students talk with each other. I put these up. I said, if you don't know what to say, try starting your sentence with something like this. Okay, I see their work on the document camera. That makes sense to me because, and then they'd point out something in their work that makes sense. I agree with what they just said because, or they want clarification. I don't know what you mean by, or I also did that because. So there's ways of talking with one another that allow people to process and understand what's going on that are not so much about pointing out what's maybe imperfect. You can do some of that too, sure, but we need strategies or ways to talk with each other that point out what's working, what resonates with us. And so this question of what do you appreciate has been a game changer in my classroom. I've just started using it this semester. And I think I also got that from listening to a talk by Rochelle Gutierrez, like moving to appreciate, moving away from critiquing and understanding toward appreciating each other's thinking. And this process of appreciating really activates sense making about each other's work, as well as helping us acknowledge that we value each other. Amani Goffney is on the faculty at the University of Maryland, and she very helpfully helped me think about points of caution with rough draft thinking. Think about whose work you're publicly positioning as being still in progress. Are you pointing out the same kids like, okay, this one, you just have a draft, you're just in progress? Who are you putting in that position all the time? What race of child are you putting in that position? What gender of child are you putting in that position? What socioeconomic classes does that child represent? Think about who you're positioning this way if you have any patterns. Of course, we can celebrate and value the work in progress, but you don't want to position someone as constantly being kind of in early stages, even if we're excited about what we can learn from early stages. Whose work are you positioning as being, having a refined draft? Are you signaling and pointing out certain students as being more competent than others? And which ways of expressing are being positioned as drafts? There might be very valid ways of expressing mathematical thinking that you may not recognize because it's not your dominant way of thinking. And so making sure it's not always a dominant culture's way of expressing is being positioned as the best draft. So I remember I've spent some time talking with people about rough draft thinking all the time, and they're like, well, what do I do? What does it mean to do this? And so what if we were to do it, if we were to do rough draft thinking, what would we do? For me, it shifted how I plan to teach, moving from what do I want students to be able to do and understand toward thinking about how might students' thinking evolve in the course of this lesson? How might their initial thinking come out, and how might they have opportunities to revise their thinking, and how might their thinking be revised in the course of a lesson or a unit? Also, how do I want students to see themselves as learners and doers of math? And how can my planning help me think about ways that students can experience opportunities to express their emerging thinking and see it as valuable? And how will students learn to hear each other and be heard? So planning for things like those sentence starters to help students express that they're understanding each other. So if I was to get this started in my classroom, I would start by continually affirming and pointing out that it's okay to share our drafts with one another. I do this in a math content course for teachers right now. Like I'm teaching math to future teachers all the time. And so pointing this out all of the time, continually modeling appreciation of ideas as they're in progress. And then the students start to appreciate each other. Wow, I hadn't seen it that way. This way of getting started gave me insight and inspiration. Oh yeah, that's something I was wondering about too. just helping like position myself as a person whose thinking is evolving along the way too. Building in explicit revision opportunities. When I was sharing about the ice cube task, I was pointing out the different ways I was hoping people would keep revising their thinking, building them in strategically. You can also do this with a unit, have students do a problem at the beginning of the unit that's accessible, and then revisit that problem at the end of the unit that they would revise their thinking about. Strategically selecting students to share. So the 5 practices that Peg Smith talks about, selecting and sequencing, I now select and sequence with an orientation toward potentially revising their thinking. I go around the room and I choose students whose ideas, they might get 100% on the test if they put forward that justification, but there's ideas of how you could represent it maybe to be more concise. Maybe the representation could be more illuminating, something like that. And I ask the class for their ideas. And when students come up to the document camera, they come up with a pen and they're revising their thinking in the moment at the document camera. Asking colleagues in the class to share what they notice, wonder, and appreciate in their peers' thinking. And acknowledging my own detour all the time as a teacher or as a teacher leaders, normalizing that our own learning is in a process of constant revision. When students are sharing in my class, like, they're like, oh, I first thought this, and then I started to notice this other thing. I'm like, yeah, tell me more about why you first thought that way. And then they'll share it, and I'll say, oh, I totally relate, and here's what I first thought. And sharing our detours and our journey of our thinking, not just our final thinking. Our thinking is worthy at any stage, even though it's never perfect. We're constantly revising. This is a meme I like a lot. We're all rough drafts of the people we're still becoming. So as our mathematical thinking is revising, we are revising ourselves all the time. We're constantly re-becoming. So the last, I'd like to close with some reflection. I put this link, and I think Barb can, yeah, thanks. And I like to end these sessions with the notion of you used to think, but now you think. And you can go to the Padlet and think about how your thinking evolved during these 47 minutes tonight in my own sharing about rough draft thinking and your experience with rough draft thinking. And we can all see each other, so I'm so excited to hear what you have to say. And if you would rather not use Padlet, you could also tweet to me, or you could email me privately. And I consider it a real gift if people are willing to share their thinking, because I learn if people share with me. So I'm really honored if anybody's willing to write on the Padlet or tweet out their ideas or email them to me. The power of intentionally planning moments for revision. That has been a relatively new practice for me. I used to think rough draft thinking was about setting norms to make class a safe space. Building in revision has been huge, and it's really changed how I teach. Oh, yeah, people are also posting in the chat. Sorry if your Padlet's not working. Yeah, revising your thinking isn't just changing what you think, but it's adding to it. It's expressing your idea slightly differently. It's making a new connection. It's maybe representing your thinking a little differently. Revising is just this constant evolution. It's not just fixing, correcting.
Yeah, and I think that for me was one of the most powerful parts. It was like, even if it's a good idea or the right answer, it's more about making the connections, or what new connections are made, or what deeper thinking or meaning or understanding are you now walking away with because of either listening to somebody else or thinking about it in a new way, or even just being tasked with thinking about it again, right? So,
Mm.
right, it's like, oh, great answer, check, let's move on. Now we're going beyond that. It's like, we'll go back to it. Why was it a great answer? What was good about it? And having that almost like a metacognition, or a meta reflection, or a meta answer now, because you're forced to think about it again, or reflect again, or now um, even critique your own thinking and from the beginning.
Definitely. I think it's just when people are sharing their thinking, there's something to notice, like, oh, I didn't think to draw the representation that way. That's so cool. Or, oh, wow, how does that strategy relate to someone else's strategy? There's just so much to talk about. And I think we've had this feeling when we teach, right? Like there's topics we've taught so many times, yet we've understand them more and more by different insights our students have. And just pointing out to students how our own thinking is continually revising too. And so we're all positioned here together as learners all the time.
And I think that's really important too, as you had mentioned about the idea of modeling this for your students, or even talking about how, oh yes, I the first time I saw this problem, I thought the exact same thing. We do that all the time in our classrooms, but I don't think we realize the value in that, because now it's not only valuing or validating, their line of thinking, like, whoa, my math professor or teacher is thinking the same way I was, but then it really shows, like, wow, our thinking does evolve, and this is a process. It's not about the one right answer in this moment, or as quick as I can get it. For me, that's one of the most powerful things in those elementary math content courses,
Mm.
where it's really showing, like, this is a process. It's not about the answer. It's not about the one right answer. I hope that there's actually a number of right answers, because I want to hear your thinking and your reasoning, all of that behind that. But
New ways of seeing,
mhm.
new ways of making sense. That's what's powerful to me. Yeah. Every time I talk about rough draft thinking, my thinking keeps revising. So that's what's hard. Like, I'm very close to being finished with a book about this, but I know that the book is just going to freeze my current thinking in time, and then my thinking will keep evolving. So I was sharing some of these ideas with a teacher in Delaware, and she liked it, and she made this and put this up in her classroom now. In a rehumanized math classroom, students' mathematical thinking is appreciated at every stage in any form, and students are appreciative of who they are, however they are each day. She liked that so much, she made a sign and she put it up in her room. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for taking their time to spend time with us tonight. And if you have thoughts that you want to tweet to me or email to me or write to me in the Padlet, I'd really appreciate it. And thanks, everyone. Thanks so much for your time. I don't know if people have things that they want to talk about, questions that they want to talk about in the chat. And if you
Yeah,
do, that's welcome.
yeah. At this point, we have still about 7 minutes or so. Feel free to post any thoughts, questions, comments. I will continue to copy and paste them into the chat window so everybody can see them. I also want to thank everyone for your time this evening. I think we really learned a lot tonight. And Mandy, you have given us so much to think about. This recording will be available, I think, on the AMTE website, but definitely on the AMMTE website, ammte.org. If you're not a member and from Maryland, feel free to join. Oh, here we go. We got a question. So, how do you respond to a student that makes a comment like, I agree with Mandy because she's smart?
That's cool. I mean, everybody in the room is smart in all kinds of ways. So, what about the thinking was helpful to you? I mean, everybody in the room has smartness. So, that's cool that you recognize Mandy's smartness. But what about the smartness was helpful? So, trying to pick tasks where there's all kinds of ways to be smart. So, what about her smartness are you noticing? And then, when other people are coming up, then the next person that comes up to share their thinking, what smartness is present here. So constantly pointing out lots of ways of being smart. I mean, other people probably have ideas about this too, so people can share how they would respond, but that's my orientation toward that question. I mean, literally everybody in the room has smartness to offer, and that's the culture I want to create, is a place where everyone can see each other's smartnesses all the time.
Yeah, that's a great way to position that. And one thing that actually came out in my class last night was my one pre-service teacher is working with a mentor teacher, and she uses the um, "don't hurt somebody else's thinking" type language. And so they were working on a math test together, and she goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I hurt your thinking." And it was such a powerful moment.
Oh.
Yeah, like one previous service teacher talking to another while they're working through the math stats, because the one was, trying to either explain or do something, and then the other it wasn't a complete interruption, but it was like, "Oh, I hurt your thinking." And so I just stepped in. I was like, I love how that's now part of your vernacular, right? It's not, we
Mm.
really appreciate hurting feelings, and appreciate may not be the right word there, but you know what I mean? We acknowledge
Yeah.
and we recognize the significance of that, but now we're talking about in class about hurting somebody's thinking. You don't want to steal their thinking or, take the words out of their mouth. And that's why I really loved your, you know, what do you appreciate? What do you
Mm.
notice? What do you appreciate? What do you
It's
wonder?
been so cool. What do you appreciate about the ideas here? Yeah. They'll say things I never thought to explain it that way. I really appreciate that because it made me think about.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions that want to come through? Feel free to send them either in the question box. That seems to be working the easiest. Mandy, I guess I have a question.
Sure.
Um, how do your pre-service teach? So I know that you clearly include many of these ideas in your pre-service teachers, like in your classroom as you're the teacher. Have
Mm-hmm.
you been able to instill these teaching practices in any of your pre-service teachers? And have they ever shared like, "Oh, I tried this in my, field placement or practicum or student teaching or whatever"? Um, are they able to do these as beginning teachers, as novice teachers?
Yeah, people can do all kinds of aspects at different stages. So you could set up norms. You could some of it's an orientation, right? Like how do we orient ourselves when people share their ideas? Modeling appreciation and encouraging students to get excited about each other's perspectives, but then also deeply engaging, constantly revising and not feeling. So yeah, so what they've been doing, what my pre-service teachers do is they spend a lot of time doing number talks and intentional talk routines. And so if you do an open strategy sharing first and then you bring a strategy back the next time they go into the field, so it could be a troubleshoot and revise, it could be a compare and connect sort of situation where you're having students make connections between two strategies that came up in an open strategy share. This is related to rough draft thinking because they can revise and make new connections to something they initially saw. So I do try to support them with making students thinking public and then bringing that thinking back the next day and say, okay, here's a strategy that came up. Let's make sense out of it some more. Let's make a connection between it. And so, yeah, I structure opportunities and methods for sure. And then in math content courses, giving them experiences where we have 2 tests and a final and then 3 quizzes. The quizzes, they can revise their quizzes. When they're sharing their thinking, they're revising their thinking up at the document camera all the time. At the end of the semester, I'm not super duper explicit with them about rough drafts are important. I just sort of model it. And by the end of the semester, they're sort of commenting on their end of the semester essays about rough draft thinking a lot, even though I sort of barely talk about it. I just more kind of live it. So I try to give them spaces to do math in ways that they're revising their thinking all the time. And then in the methods classes, giving them spaces where the students are getting to revisit their thinking and revise their thinking and make connections.
Awesome. And it looks like we got one more question here. Any strategies to allow for adequate think time for everyone due to the wide range of abilities in the classroom and how everyone needs a different amount of time to explore their ideas?
The hard thing that this comes up for me is when you choose to have the groups do a rough draft sharing. So I have students working groups for a while, then I pause and I say, okay, I'm going to have people share how they're getting started in their drafts. And that can be both liberating and frustrating. So if I time it wrong, people aren't ready to listen to another person's way of getting started because they're still in the middle of thinking about it. So I let them say, like, oh, we're not ready. We kind of wait, but it's a tough timing to make because I want people to share their drafts so they can get some inspiration. But I also don't want to, I want to give them enough think time. I'm constantly monitoring. So um, that's something I'm constantly working on. But also this space of we're going to be constantly, continually exploring whatever we're doing in this lesson. We're going to keep thinking about these ideas beyond this lesson. Even just this idea of we're constantly revisiting and revising opens up that space.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Thank you again so much. Again, this recording will be available on AMMTE's website, ammte.org. I can't thank Mandy Jansen enough. This was super exciting,
Thank you everyone for coming.
and I'm sure we'll get more thank yous in. Enjoy your
Have a good
evening,
night.
everyone.
Yes, thanks everyone.